So you've started playing D&D and you've taken a familiar, or backed up the chain, or gotten a weird fantasy pet some obscure arcane way, God forbid, played ranger, with one goal and one goal only. Finally embody the fantasy of having a fantasy creature to go on your own A Boy and His Ex movie, and then nothing. You barely use it. When you do, it feels like it's a drone you pull up for recon missions, maybe, and most of the time you forget it's even there to begin with until one of your friends goes, "Shouldn't your squirrel take damage from that fireball?" What do? Well, I'm Antonio D'Amico, this is Pointy Hat, and today we're gonna fix this whole familiar business in this here episode of D&D with a twist. Familiar Edition. So when I think of familiars, I think of... Familiars are for aunts that forward you cat videos once a month as their only form of communication, and girls that went to the library to read books about horses instead of hanging out with the other kids during recess. A familiar in D&D is basically a spirit. Don't ask what exactly is a spirit. The game is extremely vague about this. It's a spirit that has been summoned and shaped in the form of an animal. Why? Because people want familiars. I think the fantasy of having an animal companion of some sort is amongst the most popular ever, so it's wild that 99% of the time, familiars have absolutely no impact on the plot, and barely if ever actually manage to capture the fantasy that they're supposed to capture. Familiars in the game end up being a utility tool only and exclusive, something that you pull up whenever you actually remember them, if you remember them. And if you have a rogue or a ranger or another scouting class, this is basically never, because you're not gonna let your weasel steal the thunder of another player. They rarely get to feel like companions that are along for this journey of yours, and they affect the plot in no meaningful way. Ranger companions end up feeling very much the same, with the added problem of being a problem. Going to fancy Mac Rich Noble's house for a fancy Mac Moneybags party? Well, you're not gonna bring your 600-pound bear along for the ride. And what then? What happens if a fight breaks out? You get no subclass? Pets, on the other hand, are like familiars but without the utility, which means they come up even less. After going through 2 wars, a battle against mermaid pirates, and a chasing through the lava chamber of a volcano, and a trip to the astral plane, you'll suddenly remember that Buttons, your pet weasel, has been along for all of this the whole time, apparently, and nobody has ever mentioned feeding him. And then the jokes about animal cruelty start rolling in.
Stop it, he's alive! Stop it, it's not canon, he's alive, stop it!
So, as I asked before, what do? Well, I'm gonna concentrate on familiars for this video because I have some expertise on them, and they are the most readily available of the bunch. Not everyone is a ranger, thankfully, and pets are very much not a necessity at all, but I think that the advice here can help with both of those. So, what do I propose? Well, I'm trying to cater and fulfill that fantasy. You know the one, the fantasy pet one. The wizard reading a dusty tome with a cat crawling on his lap. The sorceress welcoming the party through her familiar snake and speaking through it. The mage that fights alongside their magical animal. The whole journey with a magical beast. That's the fantasy. Of course, if you don't want to play this fantasy, this isn't for you, but I can assure something else in this video will be, so stick around. Anyway, why is that? Why is this fantasy rarely satiated in the dragon game? Well, I think we're so quick to forget about our weird animal companions because they have basically no effect on the plot. On the whole world, even. Okay, imagine for a second that we lived in a world where a barely competent caster, and I do mean barely competent, Find Familiar is a level 1 spell, could summon an animal friend that could do their bidding and change shape on occasion. Do you realize how much that would change the world? I mean, His Dark Materials, anyone? That's an entire series based on the concept of people having basically what would be familiars in D&D. Familiars should have an effect on the world, or rather, they can if you and your DM work together to make this little fantasy of yours a reality. And if you, as the DM, want them to be. But don't worry, I'm not gonna tell you to talk to your DM and leave it at that. I mean, do that, 100% do that. Tell them that this is what you want, but I'm gonna do more than that. 3 things to be exact. This is one of the most comprehensive twists on this channel. Get ready. And that's why I think that all of you that don't care about this familiar business will find something interesting, along with some other things in this video. So, what are those 3 things I'm proposing? Well, if we want familiars to not be forgotten by the plot and the narrative and the players, we gotta hit up things for players to use and for DMs to use. So how about, I don't know, a species, a monster, and a whole subclass based on this concept? That should cover our bases, right? That way, familiars feel like an actual thing that actually exists in this made-up fantasy world. All right, let's get to it. Species. Okay, time out. Isn't it insane that we don't get to just play an animal in D&D? No, not like a furry humanoid thing. No, an actual animal. Just a goose with a sword. Talking animals are such a fantasy staple. They're like the first form of fantasy, probably. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but Aesop fables? We've gotten so many weirdo species and not yet the possibility to just play a cat that casts spells doing somatic components with her tail, or a dog with a sword in its mouth. And what better way to do that than with familiars? Oh, speaking of...
Human familiar.
my time to shine. So yeah, to me a familiar species must embody the body-changing aspect of familiars. But how do we account with all the possible shapes a familiar can take? Do we give you 10,000 stat blocks like the druid? No, instead, imagine a table of traits like flying speed, burrowing speed, keen senses, and then imagine a pool of points that you can spend to take some of those traits until you exhaust your pool. And then, once you have selected all of your possible options, you decide what animal sort of embodies all of that. Pick a flying speed and keen senses, maybe you're an eagle. Pick a flying speed and a swimming speed, maybe you're a cormorant. Do you guys know what that bird is? I know from Pokemon. Pick dark vision and burrowing speed, maybe you're a badger. Don't sing the song. Don't sing the song. You interact with weapons and equipment when your own anatomy allows it with your own body, but when it doesn't, that's when your inherent magic as a familiar comes in handy. Literally handy. Like imagine this. You swing your sword with your mouth, Zora Ronoa style, when you're in dog form, but while in goose form, it floats around you because you're holding it with a custom version of Mage Hands only available to awakened familiars. That's pretty good. Human familiar, you are dismissed. Something tells me you're not done with me yet. Think about it. Think about the most important part. Imagine the little outfits that you can put on your character with this. And magic armor already is said to adapt to the shape of the wearer. Why can't it adapt to the shape of a naked mole rat? If you wanted to, that's pretty sick. What's important about having a species option to solve our familiar problem is what it unlocks for both players and DMs. Yes, it's sick that you can finally play just an animal, but also, you as a DM can now make NPCs that are or used to be familiars. So how about we put that to the test? Let's make a PC backstory around this whole awakened familiar species. There had been rumors that Igor was the wizard and not the familiar for centuries now. This was not true, of course, but the Lady Fi enjoyed keeping the mystery alive. Despite her immeasurable power and a gnome's long lifespan, her age was catching up to her, which meant that Igor was sent out in more and more errands for her. Igor would attend conferences at the Academia of the Arcane for her, the old gnome archwizard seeing through his eyes and speaking through him instead of being present in body. Igor would meet with dignitaries and politicians that requested the help of the Lady Fi. Igor would even train most disciples of the archwizard, having become intimately familiar with the Lady Fi's particular way of casting magic. If Lady Fi ever stepped foot out of her wizard tower, she did so always with Igor by her side. Which was why Igor found it so perplexing when the archwizard leaned down to meet him at eye level, handed him her sword cane that she still used from her blade singing days, and told him that she was going on a trip and she would be back soon. And so, ever eager to please, Igor waited like he was instructed to at the tower. It was a tower only in name, as Lady Fi couldn't do stairs at her age, so her living quarters were only 1 story tall. The other buildings were libraries, tea rooms, and even living quarters for servants, pupils, and visitors to the tower, making it more of a compound located in a remote location away from the constant conflict of the world of men. In time, those that call the tower their home started to notice the old archwizard's absence, and they also noticed the familiar waiting day in and day out by the planar gate at the center of the tower for his master to come back home. Igor never wavered and started to tend to all the matters of the tower from his post next to the planar gate. He imparted his lessons to pupils outside by the gate, so as to avoid not being there when his master finally returned. A month passed, then 2, then 3, and then a year. And Igor became a fixture of the tower even more than he previously was. One of the statues of the garden, ever present by the gate, only moving when it was time for a lesson or to welcome a visitor to the tower. And it was one of these visitors that broke the news to Igor. A stoic general dressed in ceremonial uniform that had never seen combat, holding a pointed hat Igor recognized. A hat that had seen combat. The whispers of war had reached the remote tower, but no one could have guessed that's where the Lady Fi had been all this time. No one, including Igor, her trusty familiar. She had been summoned by the king as one of the royal mages of the Academy of the Arcane to participate in a couple of skirmishes. But those skirmishes turned into combat missions, and combat missions turned into all-out war. She danced as a blade singer once more, and just a week ago, she died like one. The Lady Fi was gone, and so Igor's watch over the planar portal had ended. Or one would think. Igor took the blade staff he had been given by his archwizard before she left, and her hat that the general had brought with him along with the news of her death, and he left the tower. The Lady Fi had said that she would come back to see Igor soon, and Igor would not make his master a liar. He was her familiar, summoned by her magic. He had to have some part of her within him after all these centuries by her side. Now Igor is an awakened familiar, one that had lost his master but still retained a connection with her, and a blade singer just like her to boot. Igor travels the world to find a way to use the very magic that makes him a familiar to bring his master back. And if this entails giving up his own existence, Igor will be eager to do it. Putting Hachiko in D&D? Magical airbud with a tragic past? I mean, who could possibly have a problem with that? A monster, no doubt. Dogs are one of my hyperfixations. I just love dogs a whole lot. I have read entire books on dog psychology. I am the furthest thing from a cat person. Dog person for life. Dog hat for life, I guess. So this was bound to happen on this channel. But think of the possibilities of the Awakened Familiar for both PCs and NPCs. An Awakened Familiar shopkeep that changes animal shape every time the PCs come to visit them. Who is the master behind the familiar? Or how about a familiar that becomes awakened after rebelling against their cruel master? Okay, so that's the species. How about we move on to subclasses? And what could possibly be a better way to give familiars more of a weight in the game and finally embody that fantasy of magical pet that can actually fight alongside you? Let's go. Subclass. In D&D, we have a concept I like to call the Ranger subclass. A subclass for Rangers? No! A subclass that feels adjacent to the Ranger because it's about having some sort of companion. The Battlesmith for Artificers with their big companion robot is a good example of this. So, doesn't the Wizard feel like a shoo-in for this concept? Why should the Warlock get to have all the fun? The Wizard is the class I think of when I think familiar, so how about we use it to embody that caster fighting alongside their companion fantasy, but in a more magical way? How about a school of magic adjacent to conjuration that specializes in the study and summoning of animals? Besides, how cool is the implication of there being wizards that specialize in familiar summoning, customizing their familiar? It's sick. In terms of abilities, oh, that's a lot of work, isn't it? Oh, let's use that again. Human familiar, get us started with what this subclass can do.
Human familiar.
I knew it. Okay, what if this subclass takes stuff from Pact of the Chain, but also goes in a completely different direction? What if this is a way for the wizard to have some sort of frontline capabilities? Which, as we know, the wizard lacks in severely. They come in with a defender, a companion. It's exactly what we want out of the My Fantasy Pet Fantasy. I'm also immediately thinking of familiars as in, wait for it, an arcane focus. They are the way you cast spells, which means you can cast through your familiar, like a warlock would, but you can also store spells for later use inside of your familiar. And not only that, what if you could use spell slots to empower it in combat, to make it even better at fighting at your side? And hear me out, what if you have some sort of ultimate ability that turns your familiar massive? Yes, tactical combat wizard cat. In combat! Okay, that's Wendy. Thank you, human familiar. I don't think you're done with me. Again. We have a pretty good start. But if this is part of our fix for the whole familiars are constantly forgotten in the game, it should be easy to build a character around them that puts the wizard and the familiar front and center, right? Let's put that to the test. The Archconjurer Carmilla V of House Pentagar had taken many pupils in her time, and she had it down to a science at this point. Start with familiar care, progress into basic conjuration, and then go on from there. Turso, her latest apprentice, had not gotten past familiar care when Carmilla's life was ended by one of the Archconjurer's many enemies. Turso, seeing both his education and his master's life cut short before he could learn anything of value, does something drastic at that point. He's not even sure himself if he does this out of some strange frustration with his master for dying on him like this, or to feel like all this time studying how to get familiar dropping stains out of his robes was worth it. But Turso decides to take a gecko familiar he was tending to when he got the news about his master, and he leaves the tower. Except this is not just a gecko familiar. The Pentagar family are a dragon hunting family, and so Carmilla specializes in raising the most complex type of familiar in order to hunt dragons effectively, dragons themselves. But raising a dragon of your own is an impossibility, unless you raise another creature into a dragon. That's what Turso was taking care of all this time. The gecko was a familiar that would one day turn into a dragon, a fledgling familiar for a fledgling wizard. On top of that, the gecko can talk, and it's extremely upset that the Archconjurer that promised it that it would one day become a dragon is now dead. So the pupil and the familiar decide to make a deal. As Carmilla's familiar, the gecko knows her spells and her techniques, so the familiar will bond itself to Turso and become both his familiar and his new master, teaching the young mage the art of familiar raising so that one day Turso can fulfill his old master's promise to the familiar. Together, they now roam the land. Turso has managed to learn how to empower the gecko, which he named Carmilla in honor of the deceased Archconjurer. And when they fight, Turso empowers Carmilla, making the familiar grow and resemble more and more the dragon that she is supposed to one day become. How to train your dragon in D&D. A familiar teaching the wizard to become a wizard. A familiar that would one day become a dragon. Imagine the banter. Imagine the familiar being this like hard-ass professor to their own wizard. Imagine all that character interaction. Imagine the wizard clapping back. This gives you so much to roleplay. And it gives so much for the DM to play with too. And ensures that your familiar is much more than a drone that you pull out during recon missions or whenever you remember that they are supposed to be there. Okay, that's one species and one subclass. How about we go for 3? Let's move on to monster. Okay, so what is a monster familiar? If this is a branch of magic that is studied and practiced, doesn't it make sense for it to go wrong? I think it would be quite easy to make a familiar monster that is sort of cutesy, and I do not want to do that. No, I want to go full horror. I want to show you that familiars can be scary. I want whatever magic practitioner created this to fear for their life and be taken by the horror of their own creation. But how? I can think of a couple of ways. No, I don't want you getting any ideas. I'll do the whole thing for this one. Hear me out. What if we use something that is inherent to the familiar and deconstruct it? Bring it to its logical, albeit extreme, conclusion. Shape change. Familiars can change into the shape of other animals, or more specifically, a wizard can decide to change their familiar's shape. The familiar does not get a say in this. What if we made a monster that was all about that? What I'm saying is, what if our familiar was less big scary animal that could not scare anyone and more the alien from It, a shape changer in the worst sense of the word? That sounds like a fun thing to put in your games. Let's make it. Reports of the creation of an unfamiliar are few and far between, but they are all marked by tragedy. The precise process to create an unfamiliar is not known, but arcanists have gleaned common links between the different instances in which one of these abominations is born. Some unfamiliars are born at the time of familiar summoning, interruption of the casting ritual, faulty or corrupted materials being used during the casting process, or even the interference of another arcanist with ill intent have been cited as reasons for these beings to arise instead of the helpful familiar. But more commonly, and more upsettingly, it's often cited that mistreatment or neglect of a familiar by its master has led to the birth of an unfamiliar. Wizards leaving their companions alone in a pocket dimension for inordinately long periods of time find that they have summoned an unfamiliar instead of their helper when they finally call upon them. Cases of familiars that do not wish to take specific animal forms being repeatedly forced to do so become unfamiliars during the shape-changing process. Spirits that never wish to become familiars being forcefully summoned from their home planes and forced into the role of familiars have been known to also turn into these monsters. There's even a case of a warlock using his own familiar in illegal fighting matches, seeing what was supposed to be his helper turn into this monster, and, what's worse, keeping the unfamiliar as it was for its savagery during matches. Cases of wizards creating unfamiliars on purpose for their strength in combat have also been reported, much to the chagrin of the arcane community. Whatever the reason may be for their creation, unfamiliars are extremely dangerous aberrations. Their form is more arcane than physical, their body being almost entirely composed of raw magic, which is what allows the unfamiliar to change its body at will. Unfamiliars manifest body parts of different animals in the blink of an eye, according to their needs, sprouting wings 1 second to fly high, only to then plunge into a body of water and swim with its newly formed fins. This roiling arcane energy at the heart of the unfamiliar's existence also allows them to cast magic, although they cannot control it. The unfamiliar slings the spells its master knew against its enemies, and most often against its former master. Unfamiliars seem to have a seething hatred for arcane spellcasters, and more particularly, their former masters, or any caster with their own familiar. Spellcasters facing an unfamiliar along with their own familiar report their familiar being particularly shaken by the experience, with some witnessing their familiar struggling to keep its form after seeing the unfamiliar. This possibility that the condition of unfamiliar is a contagious one among familiars, along with the monster's hatred for magic practitioners, makes destroying unfamiliars a priority among spellcasters. But is there a way to heal them of this condition? I have no clue, but you do if you get my codex? What? Yes, welcome to the Arcane Collection. What's that? Well, dropping the shtick. All of this and past twists on this channel, they are in a book, in a codex, in an Arcane Codex. That's right, told you I was doing way more than merch. We are launching our first collection. And yes, there's still 100% certified Pointy Hat free stuff in there. Do not worry. I've only given stuff for free on here since the beginning of my channel, so I wanted the first thing I ever make for those that feel like supporting me to be really, really cool. So this is it. The Arcane Collection is based around the theme of the arcane. Arcane magic, arcane beings, arcane rules, all the glowing magic circle stuff. First of all, the collection features a codex, a 100-page hardcover book that contains updated past twists twist as seen on the channel, and brand new stuff. A brand new wizard subclass all about summoning familiars to fight in battle, the awakened familiar species, and the unfamiliar monster, all of those we've talked about in this video, but also updated, polished versions of past twists as seen on the channel. 6 subclasses, 4 species, and 5 monsters. Here are the ones included, scrolling on screen in case you're curious. And guess what? It's cheaper than any other D&D book, because I wanted it to be so. I wanted everybody to be able to get it. And it's on sale right now for full pre-order. It's cheaper, but we are making it as pretty as possible. 100 pages, as I said, but full hardcover, and wow, is it worth collecting. The cover is illustrated by me with custom-made interior pages, also made by me, and we're looking into extra fancy stuff like gold foil and spot glossing. I want it to look amazing on a shelf. I don't care about margins, I guess. I want it to feel like a collector's item. And when we launch other collections, other than the arcane one right now, I want every codex in there to look amazing next to one another. You think we're done? No, guess what? We get a plushie! Yes, your very own Pointy Hat familiar. We have a plushie of me. It's insane. Do you really think I was going to launch a Pointy Hat collection without a Pointy Hat? Come on. And you can change the eye. They are eye patches, get it? That you can swap and change his expression to best portray my winning personality. You think that's it? No, again, apparel, all designed by me. We have a retro dragon slaying tee that did amazing at Gen Con. We have a many hats tee with graphics in the front and the back. We have 2 amazing crew necks I've been wearing constantly because they also did amazing at Gen Con and because they are so soft. We have 2 hats, all embroidered with actual thread, and the human familiar t-shirt, I guess. And if you want a bunch of these, we have bundles, 2 bundles, the white mage bundle and the black mage bundle. They all include the plushie and the arcane codex because, I mean, who am I kidding? They are the sickest part of this collection. But they also include 1 crew neck and 1 hat. And these change depending on white mage or black mage. So you can reflect your preferred arcane allegiance through your clothes. And as I said, of course, there's 100% certified Pointy Hat free stuff. The unfamiliar, the monster familiar, is up for you to grab right now. Go get it. This might be super stupid to make free because I think that having the thing in D&D is so sick, but maybe people won't buy the stuff because of this, but I don't care. It's the soul of the channel. I'm not betraying that. But if you do want to support me, the Arcane Collection is right there for you to grab, and it's the very first link in the description. Important note, listen up, this is a pre-order. I have plastered that all over the page. We're sending all of this in summer 2025, but you would do well to grab it right now because we have a sale going on, Black Friday and all that. For the codex, for the plushie, and most importantly for the bundles. The bundles have a massive discount. So yeah, real talk now, I don't have a Patreon. Not yet anyway, maybe one day. I believe so strongly in the whole thing this channel is about, which is giving free stuff. And if y'all are actually gonna support me monetarily, I want it to be worth it. If y'all are going to do that, I want you to feel like you're getting some really cool shit. Everything here is made by me, literally sitting down and writing and drawing for hours. Everything you see is made by me. Apparel, codex, everything. I even did a turnaround for the plushie. And it's a labor of love, and I hope you dig it. I'm so proud of it. This is the proudest I've been of something. So I hope you like it too. All right, enough. I'm off because we're doing an extra video in December because I didn't want to put a sponsorship in this video. So expect a video next week and the week after that. Oh God. All right, back to my work cage. Love you. Please check out the thing. I worked very hard on it. Bye. Love you. Bye. Mwah.